All right, sounds good. All right, first, thank you guys for joining us this morning on the call. We're excited to start this. Brian and I are working together to just try to get some information out about health and nutrition just to a variety of different people. So this morning we have my friend Taryn Leiker. She is going to speak to us today about a topic you normally don't talk about unless you are with my mom visiting our friends, and then we talk about bowel movements quite regularly, which is just odd. But Taryn is a stay-at-home mom. She's hanging out with her daughter right now in Kansas City. She's a totally successful entrepreneur, and then she's also had some incredible nutrition training. So she's going to talk to us today a little bit about bowel movements. So Taryn, go ahead and take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I'm just honored to be able to share this. It's not often that somebody says, hey, we're going to go ahead and let you have a platform to talk about poop. And it's one of my favorite topics because, while it does ruffle some people's feathers because it seems like a taboo topic, I do believe that it is responsible for your health and well-being. And so if your bowel movements are on track, then your health is on track. And so if we're scared to talk about this topic, then what is our health going to do? It's not going to be on track. And so is this really an issue? Is it even worth really talking about bowel movement? I do believe it is, because the statistics show that constipation affects 65 million people. Really think about that. 65 million people have backed up bowels. It is actually responsible for 2.5 million physician visits annually. So people are saying, hey, you know what, something's not right, I'm going to the doctor, and ultimately constipation is the reason for 2.5 million physician visits. And how much is being spent annually on laxatives? It is actually staggering, especially when you look at the top 5 prescription drugs. When you combine their totals, it doesn't even come close to what we spend on laxatives. $800 million on an annual basis is being spent on laxatives. And if you're unfamiliar with a laxative, it is something that is going to help make a bowel movement simpler. So I do believe that it is definitely a topic that needs to be discussed, because when your food goes in, it needs to come out. That's simple math. So if the average person has 3 meals a day, let's do the math, for 7 days, how many meals do they have go in? They have 21 meals go in. Well, unfortunately, I want to give my example as a pattern, because it's not as far off for people as you would hope. But I actually was having one bowel movement every 3 to 5 days. And it was not a healthy bowel movement. It was actually terrible when I look back at it, and constipation was definitely affecting my life in more ways than one. And so if I only had 1 to 2 bowel movements come out and 21 went in, is that or is that not a dangerous situation? And just to give you an idea, at that time in my life, not only was I overweight, but I was on several prescription medications, many of them related back to inflammation and also depression. And so it was just something to where constipation was not only affecting me physically, but mentally. And I was not a happy person. I was actually mean-spirited, and that is not my nature in any way, shape, or form if you truly know me. But I just couldn't shake this terrible mood. So one of the aha moments that I had was this, and I want to share it with you and really think about this. Like a kitchen, not taking out the trash eventually overtakes the kitchen, but it doesn't stop there. It seeps into the other rooms one by one and eventually takes over the house. The kitchen is the bowel, and the other rooms are the 6 channels of elimination, and our body is the house. How long until yours would be condemned? Or are you taking out the trash regularly and taking care of your body? Because that is what it all comes down to with the bowels. The state of our body is going to be the health of our bowel movement. So what should this look like? I had no idea. I was like, well, how many are you supposed to have? What are they supposed to look like? Because there was no rhyme or reason to mine. All I knew it was nasty and it was stinky. But let's talk about a typical 24-hour period. Basically, your food enters your stomach. After you've chewed it, swallowed all of that, it goes down the esophagus, goes into the stomach. Then it's processed a little bit and needs all the nutrients, and then it goes into the small intestine and then the large intestine. So that is the progression. And then, of course, it leaves. So let's go through a typical day, and we're going to have 3 meals in that day. So at 8 a.m., if you eat breakfast, it's going to be in your stomach at that point. Then by noon, 4 hours later, that breakfast is actually going to be towards the end of the small intestine, not quite to the large intestine. So then by 1 o'clock, we're going to go ahead and we're going to eat lunch. So lunch is in the stomach, and then breakfast is actually going to be leaving the small intestine and entering into the large intestine. By 5 o'clock, so 4 hours later after you've eaten your lunch, lunch is going to be in the small intestine and breakfast is going to be in the large intestine. It's actually going to be, if you look at your stomach, everything moves clockwise. So it's ascending colon, transverse colon goes across, and then the descending colon. And so your breakfast at that point is going to be in the transverse, so it's going across at this point. And that is at 5 o'clock p.m. So at 6 o'clock, we go ahead and we eat our supper, dinner, whatever you'd like to call it. And so breakfast is completely in the descending colon. Lunch is in the ascending and transverse. And then your stomach that you just, or your dinner that you just ate is in your stomach. So at this point, 6 o'clock p.m., you have had 3 meals. There's a place for everything and everything in its place. No discomfort here at all. And so by 9 o'clock p.m., 11 hours later, breakfast is in the sigmoid colon, ready to be discharged. And then your lunch is in the large intestine, and dinner is in the small intestine, getting ready to go into the large intestine. And then by 10 o'clock p.m., breakfast is gone. So that is 14 hours later from eating breakfast that it should leave your system. So let's stop and think about this, because as people are getting their bowels in order, the number one thing I hear people say is that they don't want to go to the bathroom at work. But if they have good, proper digestion, is there any reason for you to be using a public restroom? Most people are going to be off work and at home by that 9 to 10 o'clock range in the evening. And so it's one of those that if digestion is actually what it should be, it's going to be spot on. If everybody could mute their line individually, I hear some talking, that'd be great. 10 p.m., so breakfast is out, obviously. Lunch is moving through the colon, and so is dinner. And so while you're sleeping overnight, it's actually going to process and get to the descending colon. And by the time you wake up at about 6:30 in the morning, you should have a bowel movement right away. Now, dinner and lunch can leave together, or they can leave separately in a bowel movement about an hour apart. And so by 8 o'clock a.m. the next morning, every single thing that you put into your body the day before is actually out. And so I just find that fascinating, because that is exactly how we were designed. And if you think about this, why is it accepted that when you feed a baby, they are going to have a bowel movement very quickly? And in fact, if they didn't have a bowel movement, you would be concerned. The doctor would be concerned. And so when you look at that, when does it change? At what age do we say, okay, once you eat, we no longer should have that bowel movement? The same thing with animals. You know, I've been watching my sister's 2 dogs, and it's like clockwork. Their system is just rolling and moving along. So everything that is going in is getting out, and that ultimately is healthy digestion. Now, if it's not healthy, think about this. What does that do to that abdomen? It's not going to be soft. It's going to be very hard. That's when you're going to start to see different colors and different shapes that we really shouldn't with our bowel movements. So let's talk about those a little bit. There's actually an app that I love. It is called Poo Keeper. And yes, right away it does say that you could take a photo of it. I personally don't keep photo logs of my bowel movements, but I just skip to that, and then it kind of walks you through so that you can keep track and see where your the health of your bowel movement is. So the goal is always going to be a bowel movement that is well formed, going to stay together, and it's like soft served ice cream. It's not loose, there's no pebbles. But when we start to vary off of that, when it's too loose and not compact, then we're venturing on the side of diarrhea. Well, this could be something going on in your system, but it could also be, if there's blockage, that your body's just trying to move anything through. And so you have to kind of ask yourself, what has my typical pattern been? And then also, if somebody is really dehydrated, you may see more pebbles or see where it looks like a bunch of rocks put together. And this is where we can really start to struggle and feel miserable. Many would report hemorrhoids at this point. So you want your bowel movements to be well-formed and stay together. And so what are some of the key things that we can do in order to help out our bowel movements? How can we get the most out of our health? Well, one of the main reasons that people will suggest breastfeeding right at first is actually for the benefit of colostrum. Well, colostrum in an infant actually helps to establish the gut flora. There needs to be a mixture of good and bad gut flora in your intestines, but the mix should be about 80% good bacteria and 20% bad bacteria. But in most Americans, it's actually flip-flopped. And so we need to change that. So a very simple, very economical way that you can do that is to find a great probiotic. And then, of course, you heard how dehydration can affect your bowels in a very uncomfortable way. And so making sure that you are hydrating properly. You know, are you drinking enough water? Water is the best source that you can actually get to rehydrate your body. You know, are you getting that good quality fiber? That's something that is so important to make sure that you move things along. There are a lot of different things, nutrients, especially that are in the marketplace now, that can basically act like a little brush and clean your intestines as they're going through. So there are some amazing things you can do there. So probiotic, make sure you stay hydrated, and then fiber. And then the biggest thing that we really need to do is we need to stop using those stimulants like laxatives, even coffee, sodas, wine, alcohol, because those stimulants can actually start to perform the duties for your body. So when we overuse laxatives, our body says, well, we don't have to remember how to physically go through the motion of this bowel movement, because as soon as we get that substance, we're going to go ahead and just have all the functions performed. And so the habitual use actually has your body forget how to properly work. It is possible to retrain your body. The body is absolutely brilliantly designed. And so that is something that can be of a huge benefit as well. And so if you are feeling tired, if you're feeling sluggish, if you're feeling moody and you really can't explain why, really start to look at the patterns of your bowel movements. And like I said, that app, Poo Keeper, could definitely help you out with that. And it's not saying that you couldn't ever have any of those stimulants, but making them a pattern is definitely unhealthy for your body. And also pocketbook. I mean, just think of how much you could actually save if you avoided some of those stimulants. So with that, I will pass it back to Lene. I hope you've learned something about your bowels, and I hope all day long it's on your mind and you're thinking about it in a whole new way that you never did before.
All right. Thank you, Taryn. What a way to start a Friday morning talking about poo. All right. Does anybody have any questions for Taryn?
Taryn, what was the name of that app again? You said Poo Keeper?
Yes, and it's two separate words. And it just has a little picture. It's a blue background and then a toilet bowl.
Okay. I will try to find that. Thank you for that tip. That was awesome. And all of it.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Any other questions?
Another thing I might mention is for those of you that have kids, have that conversation with them, because it was fascinating for me to find out over the last 4 years how many kids actually have constipation issues but never said anything to their parents, but were actually miserable. So even something as silly as the app could actually help open that conversation where they might typically not say anything.